Welcome, friends. Pour your favorite cup of tea, coffee, or cocoa and settle in for Sips from the Utica Institute Museum. Sips from the Sip is all about sharing the history of little-known people and places in Mississippi. We're serving up truth, justice, with a dollop of sass. I'm your host, Jean Greene. Today's episode is the 30th of a multi-part series of readings and discussions from the book, Black Man's Burden. Joining me today to discuss Chapter 14 is Mrs. Doris McClure. Mrs. McClure is a Utica resident and an alumnus of the Utica campus. For our program today, Mrs. Doris McClure. Mrs. McClure has been a stalwart, backbone pillar of the Utica campus of Hines Community College. She worked for 23 and a half years as the administrative assistant for Title III, but ended that position as
budget analyst and office manager.
Budget analyst and office manager. They could just say the woman that runs Title III is what they could say. But I'm so pleased that she is willing to join us today to discuss Chapter 15. And I'm going to let her bring this in her own way, as they say. So, Ms. McClure, tell me about Chapter 15.
Okay, Chapter 15 starts out with Mr. Holtzclaw said he did not understand why the people was afraid of Whitecap. His experience had been very great with the white people. But Whitecap was very active. He knew they was active over in Lincoln County. And the black people was afraid because they was a malicious group. We would say they did lynch people, even though it wasn't too active in this era. So he figured that people should not have been afraid because they was not that dangerous. But however, he goes on to talk about the governor at that time. He took action to make sure that the people were safe in this area, really to run them out. And that's as much as he knew on that part. And during that time, right after that, Dr. Washington, he visited Jackson, Mississippi. And there was a newspaper that was written, a paper that was written trying to encourage all the white people not to attend the visit. So he said Dr. Washington was coming, and most of the leaders that was encouraging the white people not to attend, but so many attended until after Dr. Washington left the Coliseum, it fell in and some people got injured there. And so it turned out to be a real good experience in that building. So a few people got injured. Bishop Charles Galloway was injured, but for the most part, everybody was okay. And from there, Mr. Holtzclaw went on and talked about the time in the farming in the boll-weevil that came here across this part of the country where they was farming cotton. Boll-weevil ate a lot of cotton, and people couldn't hardly make their bales for the year.
Right.
But there was a newspaper, and he was always trying to give people instructions and help them to learn how to live within this era and make a living. So he encouraged them, don't just pull up and leave. It has been proven by experience in Washington that if you change the way that you farm, then you could make a crop and make a living. Right. So he went on to write this letter that was printed in the Utica News and proceeded to tell the people how to cultivate the land. Started a few weeks earlier, 2 or 3 weeks early. Put some time into the land. Plant early, and then take the time and clean around your land, burn the bushes in the hedges, and dig up the stump where boll-weevil will live and strive in, and that will help you have a better crop. Work your field, be able to live at home, and cut down those hedges, and you'll be able to have better harvest. And he also went on, don't just depend on the cotton, because with the boll-weevil, he knew that you would not get 100% of the cotton.
That's right.
So with the boll-weevil, go on and plant you some greens, some vegetables,
right.
some potatoes. Don't just plant enough for you, plant enough to sell to the other people.
Right.
That will help you with your income. Raise you some hogs and some chickens to help with your family, to also help. Don't just depend on it. He said, and then he went on to let them know, then you'll be able to live at home. You don't have to pick up and leave every time somebody else comes and say that over here we're having a good crop, because eventually the boll-weevil is going to go from county to county to county, and it's going to make it over there as well. So don't just depend on being able to go to the merchant, because the merchant already know that the cotton is not going to be that great. Cut back on, if you farm some things that you can have at home, potatoes, vegetables, and all that, then when you go to the merchant, only ask for what you need. Cut back 2 or 3 pair of shoes for that year. Don't buy the big hats, the Sunday, he called them Sunday hats.
Right.
Fewer clothes and stuff like that. Just buy what you need and you will be able to survive. So that was the beginning of the book. He said there was a couple of things in here that he said, one thing we must all remember in connection with the year is that we cannot hope to go to the merchants and buy things on credit as we have been doing. We should buy those things and those things only that we need. So that was his exact word to that. And he said, and I believe you would have nothing to regret at the end of a harvest year. And after that, he went on to talk about in this book that he will often speak at conferences. The conference that he spoke at, this one conference, was here at the Utica Norm in Industrial Institute. And it was also printed in one of the newspapers. And at this conference here, he was real disturbed about the number of Negroes, that's what they called them, Negroes that was on the change game, that was going to prison.
Oh, right, yes, ma'am.
Right, that was going to prison and having a hard time and thought that they had to do crimes and maybe stealing and all these kind of things. So he was very displeased with this, and he wanted to know what could be done to help them. But he let them know, he said to complain of Utica is one thing, and to surmount them is another. So he said, our salvation here in the South is very large a matter of Christian intelligence, industry, and morality. We must possess these or we must ultimately fail.
Right.
So some things we have got to try to do for ourselves, because everything is not hindering us.
That's right.
Nothing has yet arisen to prevent us from being truthful, honest, upright, energetic, and moral means. So if we have hope and belief, Holtzclaw feel like if we put our time in, that we could accomplish what we needed.
You know, when you mentioned that quote, that brought back to my mind when he said to complain of obstacles is one thing, and to surmount them is another. This chapter, Ms. McClure, seems to really come home with what we're going through today.
Right.
You know, we complain of the things that are stumbling blocks.
Right.
We don't try to get over them or around them. We just kind of sit and I'm talking we as in general people, black people.
Right.
And Holtzclaw was saying, well, you know, come up with a solution. Work your way around it. And he used, if you look at the example of that boll-weevil, because the boll-weevil came up from Mexico and swept all over the South. And folks, instead of trying to stick it out and learn what to do, they just ran away from it. And it followed them on wherever they went. So it's like, if you think about the problems that we have and we try to run away from them.
Right.
If you don't change what you're doing, they're going to follow you on. Think if we could talk for a minute about how what he said can work for us today. What did he say for the folks? Don't buy what you don't need.
Don't buy what you don't need. Exactly.
So that's something that we need to kind of put back into practice. You know, some of us, I'm not going to call any names that may be in this room,
who like to buy purses. And may buy more than she needs. So instead of buying 6 purses, I have to be happy with the 1 purse I've got.
It's like me. I like shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm headed to surgery. And I still had some shoes sitting in my, I won't call the name of the company, but in my box. So it's so many things we can do without, I think. And we have to put the effort to have the things that we need, because just thinking about him and reading this, not just this chapter but this book, every time he had an obstacle to come in front of him, he failed, he had to go back home, he did not have clothes, he never gave up.
Right.
He never gave up, he kept going. And so that's why he can be so encouraging, I think, to the people of this time, to not give up. At one point in this chapter, he talked about sometimes there was hundreds of wagons of people just leaving their farm and leaving that era, which was senseless to him, because, as you just said, the boll-weevil eventually is going to make it on over to the next county, the next state, going all over the South. Right. And a lot of these people some of them, they had a wagon, they probably had a little homestead, you know. And so they was leaving without any compensation.
Right.
They were just leaving and moving on. And when he was telling them, stay the course.
Right.
It has been proven in the agriculture department in Washington, it had been proven that if you prep the land before, clean it off, and say the boll-weevil was just making us do what we should have been doing all the time.
Right. He did
all the time. And those was his word. Clean off those ends of those roads. I have to say I came from a farming family. So I understood when he talked about this. I know what a boll-weevil looks like. I've seen it in cotton, although I never picked about 20 pounds.
But still.
We was farmers. And so there's a lot of preparation. You got to get up and not be lazy about it.
Right.
Get up and do. You know, he said somewhere on back in earlier chapter, he talked about some of the farmers that were not doing this well is because they would put the seed on the hard ground, then they would take and bust the row and just let that dirt cover them. So the seed was having a hard time, but he encouraged them to get good seeds at that. Don't just get seeds, but to get some good one and plant it and cultivate it and clean it up. These are things we should be doing all the time. Just do it a little earlier, you know.
To kind of get ahead of the boll-weevil.
The boll-weevil.
You know, when George Washington Carver came to help him at the farmers' conferences, what he said in this chapter is kind of what they were telling the farmers at those conferences. You know, try to prepare your land. And what did he say about raising other crops, Miss McClure?
He said to raise some corn. Don't just raise enough for you. Raise enough to sell to other people. Plant you some vegetables, potatoes. Raise you some hogs.
Right.
And some chickens.
Right.
So, you know, that means you got eggs, you got meat.
That's right.
And if you hatch out some, somebody may want to buy some of them.
That's right. So you're providing for your family and not just waiting on the cotton to make and what little money you can make from that to try to buy something from the, what do you call it, merchant?
Merchants.
Because you already owe him.
Right. And you were not going to be able to get what you got last year because they knew that your crop wasn't going to do as well.
Right.
A lot of times people, they put stuff on their tab and they pay once they finish all their bales. But if you're only going to get, at this time, once after about 5 years in, he talked about people were getting 2/3 of their crops back because they had started practicing what they had learned, what they had been taught. They put it in practice.
Right. I get so much inspiration from this book, thinking about what we are doing now, the things we are going through now, not just in our farming, but we're sitting here in Utica in a food desert. You know, we were trained to rely on the grocery store to provide us with our vegetables and our meats and whatever. Now, there was some folks still, you know, raising their own hogs and cows and chickens and stuff. But for the most part, Folks would, get up and run up to the store to get their potatoes and run up to the store to get the tomatoes and whatever. And then when that left, here we are in the same shape as these folks Holtzclaw was talking about. So trying to get us to put a tomato plant out there, put a pepper plant or okra plant, or throw out some greens. It's just common sense, but it's hard to get us out of consumer mode and into producer mode. And he was trying to get them to produce.
To produce and produce well.
Right.
Produce well.
Don't be selfish and just do it for me and my kids, but have enough that you can share, quote, sell to somebody else who might not be as fortunate to have the land or the space to do that. When y'all had a farm, did y'all have a garden too?
Yes.
Was it a big garden? What y'all grow out there?
We would have collard green, okras, tomatoes, and actually when it came to the peas and butter beans, they was over in what we call the field. So because you need a lot of them because you putting up for the winter. Right. So then we would have sweet potatoes. And you gather those sweet potatoes up and you put them in what they call the pump house. And they last all winter. You put hay in over. Okay. So you go outside and you get them. They will be just as fresh as you got them out the field. You had to open them up when you first put them in and let them what they call dry out. And they will keep. And so we would have watermelon. We had watermelons that we just would sell in the community. My father let us just sell them. Just for us to have children have money in their pocket, not so much market all the time. But we also did market of tomatoes, okras, and cotton back in the day. Yes.
I remember my parents didn't have, well, yes, they did. They had a little teeny garden. But my grandparents had a big garden, and they had, we were talking peanuts earlier, they had a peanut patch way back at the end of where the cotton was growing. They had the cotton part. Then they had a cornfield where they grew corn. And then way back, too far for me to want to walk, way back at the end was the peanut patch. And I remember them getting those peanuts out of the ground and then putting them up so they dried.
Yes.
Laid them out to dry. What I was going to talk about was the garden. Grandmama had this huge garden, and I hated working in the garden because she wanted me to help her weed. And you had to weed by hand. And I was, there's worms up under there. And some of them sting. The big old stinging worm. Oh, Lord, I dreaded working in that garden. I would rather she whoop me than have me go out there in the garden. And the other thing was her chickens. I didn't know chickens could fly. I had no idea. She went somewhere and told me to go down. I was grown. Told me to go down there and feed her chickens while she was gone. So I went in the front door. When I stepped out the back at the chicken feed, I didn't know the things were sitting in the tree, Miss McClure. I stepped out in the yard and they knew I had to feed. This cedar tree erupted with all these chickens that came flying towards me. I threw that stuff up in the air and took off running. Oh, I had no idea. But she had, I don't know how many chickens, and so she had fresh eggs and all these fresh vegetables. And we have gotten away. Well, I tried doing a little, what do you call it, little container garden. And one year it was okay. And the next year I had big, beautiful plants.
Tomato plants.
But no fruit on them.
No, yeah, that happens sometimes.
Oh.
That happens sometimes.
I was like, what did I do? I fed them the wrong thing, I guess. I didn't feed them enough to make the fruit. But getting back to Holtzclaw and how that can, if we can take to heart, he taught his people in the Black Belt Improvement Society in his farmers' conferences, the examples he gives in this chapter, we could turn some things around, even on this campus.
Exactly. It would be nice to have something agriculture really going on here. It could be turned around. Yeah.
I could see, talking with several of the other folks that have been here for a minute, we can see a way that we could uplift not only the community but the school, and that would go a good way to uplifting the area. Exactly. But you got to have folks who what is the word, committed to doing the work.
Right. And when they first put that little house out there,
the greenhouse
out there, they were raising some stuff up in there, and then it brought people in from the community. Even if you look around the building, they had raised beds out there.
Sure did have.
And made some vegetables out there, and gave them to people. Tomatoes, probably some squash, kale, and different things like that was out there. And then they would have the plants in there, and that helped with your flow of community people coming back to the campus. It's exciting. It shows that we're carrying on the legacy of Holtzclaw.
Exactly. There's one thing that I have been really excited about that I'm hoping can come to the campus. Like you said, they had the raised beds, and it was open to whoever wanted to come. I remember when we had the pecan trees. Yes. And anybody could come in and pick up pecan.
Yes.
So if you wanted to cook pecan anything, you could come to the campus and just pick them up. And when they cut them all down, I thought, well, that's going to cut down a lot of, traffic. But it's also going to cut out what people in the community had access to.
Right.
And Holtzclaw had a pecan orchard because there are letters to Dr. Provine, who was the president of Mississippi College, where he wrote to Holtzclaw telling them how much his wife, Provine's wife, appreciated the pecans from the Utica Institute. And I was like, well, if we could reinstitute that, just plant a few.
Yes.
And have that started back. If we could do something on the line of what Sip Culture is doing. Sip Culture, when they are in their growing and harvesting season, they give away fresh fruits and vegetables to seniors.
Right.
So, that keeps your older folks from having to try to scramble and get a ride to get somewhere so they can get some potatoes or greens or squash when they have and it's usually a good, what is folks say, it's enough to make a mess for you, a meal. So it would be nice if we could sort of put back into practice some of the things that Holtzclaw mentioned in that chapter.
I picked up a many pecans out here. Of course, I never knew they was over here till I started working. But right down the street, right there in front of the DWL building, that was the best one on the campus.
That's right.
They were big. That was good. And you just to go out and walk during the day on your break time. It was just a good little place to walk right down there, pick up some pecans, and come back and eat them or whatever. And somebody gonna come in there and trying to get them off your desk. It was real good. And there were several trees here. There was one over there by the maintenance shop that had a lot of pecans. It may still be over there.
It may be, yeah.
There's one right outside the gate right there. Where of course, I don't know what happened to the one right out from the museum, right over there.
Some of them got cut. And so we had tried a year or so ago, I think. We were going to plant a line of pecan trees from the cemetery to the museum, but I think our first mistake was we got them too small. And when the groundskeeping folks went out to mow, it just looked like a little weed to them, and they just mowed them all down. But this next time we're hoping to get more mature looking trees so that it is obvious that this is a tree, and we're going to put it in places and have it sort of secured around it so that I'm not
put down a little white stake beside it.
Okay.
A PVC pipe is what I've seen them do up there around Raymond.
Okay.
Until they get on up and mature, because they won't run over them.
Okay, that's a good. Thank you for that. Is there anything else you want to share with us, Ms. McClure? Well, I want to tell you that I have enjoyed talking with you about chapter 15, and I really appreciate your insight on it. and relating to your upbringing in the area, because you were Utica Carpenter, Reed Town person. So I want you to know I really appreciate it. And if you would agree sometime to come back and let's talk again, maybe not about the book. We may want to talk about something else. We may want to talk about farming. We may want to talk about how you reach out to folks in the community. But thank you so much for taking part in this.
You're so welcome. And it made me read the book again and again.
And again.
Because it wasn't my first time, and I've enjoyed it. And you know, every time you read something, I see it like the Bible, you learn something new.
That's
or
true.
You remember something and really understood what he was saying, you know, about
Right.
it and why he was saying it.
This really helps us, Ms. McClure, because the premise of the podcast is that we're taking the written word and we have read it aloud so that folks can read the text, but they can listen to it. And then our discussion is to give it a little bit extra meaning so that other folks can kind of step out and understand what was written. So thank you so much. Thank you for tuning in for Sips from the Sip. Join me next time for a reading of Chapter 16 of William Holtzclaw's Black Man's Burden. This program is supported by donations from our listeners. If you enjoy learning about the history of William Holtzclaw, the Utica Institute, and Mississippi, consider donating. To support Sips from the Sip and all the work at the Utica Institute Museum, visit our Patreon at patreon.com/Utica Institute. Until next time, this has been Jean Greene coming to you from the heart of the Sip.